Welcome to Meditation from Sinai Lesson 3. The title of this afternoon's class is Mastermind. And today we are going to be talking about the benefits of divine closeness. We always say that every lesson in a course is a standalone lesson. They design it that way because obviously people have busy lives and not everybody gets to attend every lesson. But I will say that this particular lesson, while it is obviously a standalone lesson in and of itself, and we'll tackle this topic, it does directly connect to the flow from last week's lesson. And that will become clear as we go along. So just to recap briefly what we did last week, in the previous lesson, we began to explore the world of spiritual meditation. In other words, spirituality, what is spirituality? We discussed how everything in this world has a soul, has a body and a soul. This is not a religious concept, although religion has a lot to say about it. I will reference you to the exercise we did last week, that any mundane action that you have has a body and a soul. When you shake someone's hand, the body of the action is that your hand is gripping their hand, and there's a certain upward and downward motion, and then you separate. That's the physical body of the action. But obviously there's a soul to the action. In other words, there's an inner content to the action, which is the agreement that two people are reaching. Similarly, if you ask someone to take them to dinner, right? There's an understanding of what's going on here beyond the eating of the food, right? When I say, hey, you have some time to grab coffee, to grab lunch, it's not because I think maybe you're missing caffeine or because I think you don't have any food at home, so I think we should go out to a restaurant and have dinner or lunch. The reason is because there's a content behind it. That's just the body of the action. What I just described as the body of the action is actually the soul of the action. And everything in this world is that way. And that, for the most part, was our definition of spirituality. In other words, everything has a spiritual content, which is not only another layer or another way of looking at this particular action or experience or item, but actually it's the only way of looking at it properly, right? To look at dinner and think that two people are going to eat is ridiculous, right? Dinner is where two people go to bond and to have a relationship and to talk over dinner, etc. Or to look at a handshake and say, this person must have an itch on their hand and that's why they're shaking hands is obviously ridiculous. It's all about the content that there is underneath it. We spent the last half hour of last week's class unpacking a meditation which helps us live more this way, right? Because we don't walk around looking at everything for its soul. Often we do look at things and all we see is the body, and we don't see the soul beneath the action or the soul beneath the experience. We perceive something as an external interaction. We don't necessarily go beneath the surface to appreciate what's actually happening beneath the surface. And we explored a meditation. It took us about 30-35 minutes where we actually did this meditation in class. It was called a hitbonenut, or a hisbonenus meditation, a contemplation meditation, where the more we think things through properly, the more we appreciate that there is a soul in everything around us. Okay. Today, I want to talk about taking this one step further to not just being something we every once in a while think about, we every once in a while meditate about, and then that affects that day or that action or that experience, which can also be helpful, right? Before you go and do something of monumental importance, you might want to be more focused, so that meditation can help. But today we'll talk about how it actually begins to become a life philosophy. In other words, the more you meditate about something, it can actually begin to permeate and change your consciousness of how you look at the world. Okay? This comes directly from text 1. Danny, if I can ask you to read for us, please. Till now, one second. Till now, we've been introducing the word hitbonenut, which means contemplation, by its root word bina. And I always make a joke that that's also my daughter's first name. But bina means understanding something properly, contemplating it properly, etc. Right? But as it turns out, there's another root word here in this Hebrew word that we can see. Go ahead.
The Hebrew word hitbonenut, contemplated meditation, stems etymologically from two root words, binyan, building, and bina, contemplation. When we practice cognitive meditation, we build ourselves as a result of gaining a more profound understanding of our environment.
So, and you can see this in figure 3.1 on page 81. The goal of spiritual meditation then is not just bina, to contemplate it and allow it to remain a moment in time when we experience spirituality, which is something that we discussed last week, right? That you take a moment to transcend you go somewhere quiet. We even discussed, separating yourself from some of your physical and material pursuits. Find a quiet space, transcend the physical world for a few moments, be spiritual in those few moments, and then come back into the material world. Now, what we're suggesting is that it's not just about those moments when we contemplate. It's actually supposed to we're actually supposed to build a new consciousness, if you will. We're constructing a new perspective that then begins to become part of our lives, a consciousness which we will call divine consciousness. Okay? Now, so what we're going to try to do in the next 80, 85 minutes is take the same idea that we mentioned last week, that everything has a soul, everything has a deeper spiritual identity beyond its physical identity, not just human beings, not just animals, not just plants, but even inanimate objects, even experiences all have a soul behind them. And we're going to try to make that an experience of how we live life in that way. And when we walk around, we live life as and looking at life as a spiritual experience together with its physical experience. So if we want to think a little bit more about this, then it's time to identify what that spiritual force is, right? We keep saying, and we keep skirting around actually defining it, but we keep saying that you have a physical action, and then there's the soul to the action. There's the spiritual force behind the action, right? What is that spiritual force? How can we define it? So Judaism proposes that the spiritual force of creation is not a static force that is impersonal and distant and kind of created the item and then lets go of it, but that godliness actually pulsates throughout the reality of the world. What do I mean? That God's presence is actually inhabiting the world and inhabiting not only us and not only animals, but every single item and experience that there is in this world. Danny, if you can read for us, please, from text 2, the Medrash elaborates.
King David exclaimed, "My soul blesses God." Why did he feel the need to emphasize that it was just his soul that praised God? He told himself, just as the soul fills the body, so does God fill the universe. So King David concluded, let the soul which possesses the same qualities as God praise him.
Okay. Thank you, Danny. There are a lot of ways. Lisa, welcome. We can't see you, but I assume you're here. There are a lot of ways to unpack this analogy. There you go. There are a lot of ways to unpack this analogy. We're on page 82 of the soul filling the body being an analogy for God filling the universe. Okay, there are a lot of ways to unpack that. I'd like to share 3 here, if that's okay. Number 1, so again, spiritual energy filling the world is similar to the way our soul fills our body. In fact, last week we were using those words. We called it the soul of the world, right? But now we're trying to understand exactly how that works. So King David uses this analogy for 3 reasons. Number 1, God's presence is manifested in the world, meaning it's not just a spiritual energy, but it's actually God's presence that there is throughout the world. Just as your soul is manifest inside your body, so too is God manifested in the world. So gone is the illusion, as per King David, that God is somewhere high up in the sky, right? Old man in the sky, that's what they always call it, right? Who's watching over the world. No, God is in the world. Okay, not just that, but number 2, then the analogy goes that he's actually filling the world and is present in every detail. What do we mean by that? Think about it. If King David is comparing it to a soul, right? If the soul was pulsating through your entire existence, except for your left pinky toe, then we would have a problem in the left pinky toe, right? Because the soul, as we're defining it, is the spiritual energy which energizes your life. And it's the only way you are alive, and it's the only purpose for which you are alive. And if that's the case, so then if that little part of the body, whichever part of the body it was soulless, right? Then we'd have a big problem on our hands. Think about when you have a human being who parts of his body move involuntarily. That's called spasming. That's medically that's an issue. You have an issue here on the table, right? So let me just unpack that a little bit more here for a second. When we say a soul fills the body, I want you guys to remove any, Kabbalistic or Jewish or religious connotations you have here. We're talking on a very simple level. A soul animates the body, and a soul controls the body and makes the body do what it does, right? Makes the body tick. So that means that when you move your pinky left toe, it's not because your pinky left toe wants to move on its own. No, it's because there's a soul. There's some sort of identity that you have which is beyond your body, right? Last week we spoke about when I talk to Elise, I'm not talking to her nose, which happens to be attached to her ears, which happens to be attached to her head, to shoulders. I'm talking to her soul. In fact, heaven forbid, if I wasn't talking to Elise, but if I was talking to someone else who didn't have a nose or who didn't have ears or who didn't have arms, it wouldn't take away in any way, or it shouldn't take away, I should say, because obviously there are people who are judgmental that way, and we all strive not to be, but it shouldn't take away with the way you talk to the person, because you're talking to a soul, you're not talking to a body, right? So in that way, the fact that the soul is the identity of the person and is what pulsates through the person, right? So it pulsates through every part of the person. When I want to move my finger, this is something we're not very conscious of on a daily basis, right? But this finger right here, I'm moving it now back and forth. It doesn't take me, a second to communicate from the head to the toe or to the finger that I'd like the finger to move. No, it's instant. Why is it instant? The reason it's instant is because it's something that I desire. When I desire it, anything that's controlled by that desire, anything that's controlled by me, in other words, my body, which is controlled by my soul, obviously is automatically moving along with that, right? So similarly, God fills the world and is present in everything. And number three, just like it is the conscious soul of a human being that guides reality, as we discussed, nobody says, this that I'm going to do just with my body, not with my soul. That's impossible. You do everything body and soul. Similarly, what guides the reality of the world is going to be the godly presence that pulsates, the spiritual force of creation that pulsates beneath the physical world. Let's just pause here for a second. Elise, you had a question? You're muted. Hold on.
Oh, I said I couldn't hear you for a minute. It was going like this on my ear, but you're back.
Okay. All right, I'm glad to hear that. So there's actually a story I think that really emphasizes this point. The previous Chabad Rebbe, who passed away in 1951, 1950 would have been the year, and when he was a youngster, the story doesn't go with an age. Well, actually, it has a year. So I don't. It was in 1896. When he was a youngster, he was walking along the way with his father, which is the fifth Chabad Rebbe, and they were walking along. And they were talking about this idea, the fact that godly energy pulsates throughout everything that there is in this world. And his father turned to him and said, "The holy Ari, for those of you that are familiar with who that is, that's an ancient Kabbalistic rabbi. The holy Arizal said that not only is every leaf on a tree a creation invested with divine life, created for a specific purpose and with a certain intent that God has with creation, but also that within each and every leaf there is a spark of a form of a soul that descended to earth to find its perfection and fulfillment." Okay. As they were walking along the way, the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, who was a youngster at the time, absentmindedly, they were walking, I guess, along a path or in a forest. He plucked a leaf off of one of the trees. I'm sure we've all done this before, right? And as they're talking, and especially when your brain is flowing and the philosophical ideas are flying, right? So he's absentmindedly, he was tearing the leaf apart to pieces in his hand. And his father looked at him and he said, "This is exactly what we're talking about." Okay, and here's where he got to. He says, if we build off this idea that there is an infinite godly energy, spiritual force, let's call it, whatever, even if we can't name it, in every single aspect of creation, then that means that when you, with your spiritual force, make a decision to destroy something with its spiritual force, there better be a darn good reason, right? There better be a reason that not only first of all, possibly benefits you, but ideally, and not only ideally, I guess by force, it would need to be something that also benefits the leaf. He says to take a leaf and to absentmindedly tear it is essentially you saying, and this is the line that he used, he says, how can you be so callous towards a creation of God He says the leaf was created for a specific purpose. What tells you that your purpose is more important than its purpose? In what way is the eye of this leaf, the eye, right, the anochi, the pulsating feeling of being conscious of this leaf inferior to yours? It's a powerful illustration of this point. And many, many years later, the Friedrich Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, went on to pen text 3 on this same topic. Lisa, would you like to read for us, please? Text 3, it's on page 83. I cannot seem to hear you, Lisa. You're not muted, but we don't seem to hear you. Oh, hello? No.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's better. Go ahead. Text 3. Nope, we lost you again. I'm sorry. We'll go to Danny for now while you sort that out. So Danny, if you can read for us, please, text 3.
Our highly detailed self-awareness of the manner in which our own soul operates within our body will allow us to appreciate that the divine is manifest within every detail of the universe, and that each detail exists and is sustained through divine energy. This parallel is expressed in the teaching: just as the soul fills the body, so does God fill the world, and is expressed in the verse, "From my flesh, I can perceive the divine." Every sensation and experience of the body, even the most insignificant, is an active expression of the soul. Similarly, even the smallest detail or phenomenon within the universe is actively directed by God. When we develop this awareness, we sense not only the divine providence in everything, but we see divinity clearly wherever we turn. We can literally see the divine exposed.
This is a very, very profound spiritual awareness for a person to have. It means essentially that not only do we notice that everything comes from God, but we feel actually how everything is an expression of God. In other words, it's not just, oh, there's a creator who created this world, but rather there is a creator that is pulsating within the world. The spiritual force which created the world is not just some spiritual force which we'll label God, who exists somewhere in some place, right? This is often a child's misunderstanding of godliness, right? That God is in heaven. And there's this place called heaven. Where it is, I don't know. It's clearly not the sky, because that's where we fly airplanes and God is not there, right? It's not the atmosphere, because that's where we fly spaceships. He's not there. But there's this other place called heaven somewhere, and that's where God is. And from there, he created the world. The problem is that we're so confined by our own experiences. When we create something, not that we ever actually create something, but when we form something, that's the way it is, right? If we make a beautiful painting, we don't climb into the painting and then somehow the image appears on the canvas. No, we stand where we stand. The painting is where the canvas is, where the canvas is. The paint is where the paint is, and then we put it all together and we make a beautiful painting. It's important to appreciate that God is not a physical human being, right? He's not just a greater physical entity than we are. He's a spiritual entity, and it's a spiritual force which is pulsating the world at every single moment. And if so, then every single thing in this world is an expression of godliness. And that's that soul that we were looking to define. That's that spiritual force that there is beyond everything, behind everything, which we were looking to define last week. So if we were to extend from last week, when we mentioned that everything is its soul, everything's definition is truly its soul, so then now we could say that everything that there is in this world is essentially God. Okay? Now, this doesn't just extend to a general object, but it actually begins, the more we think about it, the more it extends to every single detail of an object, right? Just like your soul, going back to King David's analogy here, right? Just like your soul, when it animates your body, we are essentially saying that it animates every single part of the body, even your left pinky toenail, right? If there was no soul animating it, it wouldn't be alive. Similarly, every single detail in creation is animated by God. which brings us to text 4. Danny, can you please?
The entirety of creation divides into 4 kingdoms: mineral, vegetable, animal, and human. Each of these is subdivided into myriads of specific species. If we examine the world of plants, for example, we encounter a broad spectrum of vegetation, such as trees, crops, vegetables, grass, and herbs, each category of which is further divided into multiple species. There is an astonishing variety of trees, and each kind is unique and distinguished from all other trees. There is a tremendous diversity of plants and herbs, and again, each kind offers a unique nutritional value. Some are beneficial, others are poisonous, and they each carry a unique design and set of properties. Furthermore, within each of these subspecies, there are countless individual units, each of which is similarly unique. Now, each individual unit possesses a unique life force or divine energy that is tailored for it. That life force is what we call its soul, the spiritual entity that animates it, causes it to grow, and guides everything that happens to it from the moment it sprouts from the earth until its last moment when it is plucked. Even the plant's final fate is within the jurisdiction of a specific divine providence that determines whether the plant will be harvested for an overt purpose, such as animal fodder, trampled underfoot in an apparently aimless manner, or wither in due course and disintegrate entirely. Such a matter is the result of a specific decision and calculation of divine providence. Everything in this world has a unique divine energy that is its life and guide. Each blade of grass is unique. It may appear identical to another blade, but closer examination reveals specific features that set a specific blade apart from every other blade of grass in the universe. This distinction is the result of the specific divine energy that God invests into this blade. It is an entirely individualized divine manifestation.
I want you to consider for a moment, okay? I know we throw around these numbers all the time, right? How many species are there in the world? We say, oh, billions and billions and billions, right? Unlimited amounts of species, et cetera. Usually we're counting bacteria and microorganisms, et cetera, right? But if you count only animals, plants, fungi, but not, getting to bacteria, et cetera, you are at 8.7 million unique species that there are on this earth. Okay, so consider the fact that every single one of those species has unique characteristics, has a unique design to them, right? And if we continue our thesis, the Jewish belief that every single one of them has a godly energy inside, then that godly energy, that soul, is what is making this particular species or this particular animal be the way it is, have the characteristics that it has, and therefore act the way that it acts, right? Now take it even further. Within every single one of these species, they have their own circumstances and journey that they take throughout their lives. So the soul of now, this might be a very complicated journey, if you watch any of the Disney movies, it's probably not Disney, it's probably not only Disney at this point, right? Where they take animals or plants or right, there's a Bug's Life comes to mind here, right? Where they take these and they animate them because we all feel like there's something going on, but we have no idea. So it might be a very simplistic journey. A rock's journey might be very simple throughout its life, might not be. And an animal might be more complex, and a human being might be even more complex, right? But every single one of them, that journey is being defined by the soul that is pulsating underneath it. As the Medrash tells us. Lisa, you want to give it another try? Text 5?
Sure.
We hear you. Perfect.
Rabbi Simone said, each blade of grass has the spiritual force that strikes it and tells it to grow.
So the Medrash is telling us, thank you, Lisa. The Medrash is telling us that every single item in this world, even a blade of grass, each blade of grass has its own angel, has its own spiritual force behind it, which is telling it to grow. Okay, its own, I use the word angel very loosely here, right? I'm not talking about a spiritual being. I'm talking about an expression of God, which is determining that it will grow and how much it will grow, etc. So we've gone from last week's meditation or last week's contemplation, which is that number one, everything has a soul, to appreciating that everything is actually a part of God. Everything is God. Everything has a godly spiritual force that pulsates beneath it. And this is a very, very powerful idea. The more we meditate on this idea, and we're going to do so in just a few minutes, it gives you an incredible appreciation for the world that there is around you. Imagine, if you will, a person who never saw color in his life. And by the way, if you're having a hard time imagining this, I'm happy to link to a video on YouTube after the class in the follow-up email. I'll link to this video. I think you'll find it fascinating because they have something like this. And you give him a pair of glasses, and he puts on the glasses for the first time in his life, and he begins to see color, right? He wasn't blind. He just couldn't see color. Everything was black and white. And all of a sudden, you put on a lens of glasses. By the way, we experience this on a very, very superficial level, I would say, or artificial level. I'm sure you've all seen, there are some people who like to take old photographs, these old black and white photographs that are maybe of very monumental moments in history, and then they add color to them. Now, they don't know what the color was, but they assume based on what usual skin color tones are and usual, that kind of thing, and comparing different shades of gray in the image in that way. And when you see the image in color, all of a sudden the whole thing is like, whoa, right? I mean, we have a hard time whenever we think about those days, in other words, days that were filmed in black and white, we have a hard time even imagining that the world was color. Why? Because all we see it through is this black and white screen, right? So we're like, oh, they must have just lived in black and white. And then every once in a while, we got to remind ourselves, no, we just have a black and white version of it, but it actually was color, right? So imagine if you have somebody who never saw, everything he saw was in black and white. And then you give him a pair of glasses, he puts them on, he begins to see everything in color. That's the incredible effect of looking around at the same world, but appreciating it from a whole new perspective. Similarly, that's the idea we're saying here. We all walk around, we've all eaten, we've all drunk, we've all seen trees, we've all seen flowers, we've all seen people, we've all had interactions with people, right? But if we limit it to observing just the material side of it, and not go or just the body of it, and not digging beneath that to see the soul, we are inherently denying or depriving ourselves of a tremendous experience that there is underneath it. And it really changes whether you're just living life or you're living life. This, by the way, a very similar type of analogy actually, was something that the Baal Shem Tov, those of you that are familiar, the Baal Shem Tov lived about 300 years ago. And he was the founder of the Hasidic movement. And he wrote a letter, he penned a letter, which comes to us from one of his students. It was put in a book, was put pen to paper, a copy of it, etc., by one of his students. He wrote a letter to someone who came and asked him. By the way, this is going to sound so silly today because we live in a country that is defined in our constitution based on the pursuit of happiness. But believe it or not, there was a time when Hasidim, right, were actually ridiculed by other religious Jews, and the most derisive name that they came up for, that they came up with for them, was the Freiliche. They used to call them the happy ones, and this was a derogatory statement about them. Anyways, so someone once asked the Baal Shem Tov, he said, your Hasidim, they look like insane people. They're extremely happy, and it is insanity. It doesn't look normal. What's going on here? So the Baal Shem Tov explained, text 6. Lisa, can you read for us, please?
Yes.
It's on page 87.
Sorry.
You're good.
Okay. The following parable I heard from my master, my grandfather, the Baal Shem Tov of blessed memory. There was once a talented musician that played beautiful, sweet music. All who heard it were mesmerized by the sweet, pleasurable, blissful, sweet sounds. They could not hold themselves back from dancing to the rafters in sheer ecstasy. The closer the people drew to the source of the music, the more entranced they became, and the more ecstatic their dancing. Just then, a deaf individual came across the scene. Not noticing the musician, he simply observed the people dancing wildly and regarded them as crazy. What on earth could make people so ridiculously joyful all of a sudden? He muttered to himself. Now, if he were intelligent, wise, and knowledgeable, he would deduce that they must be dancing to a delightful melody. In fact, contemplating the depth of pleasure they must be experiencing, judging by their response, he would be moved to join them in the delightful dance. The analogy is obvious.
The Baal Shem Tov concluded, right? And he said, Hasidim are moved by the melody that issues forth from every creature in God's creation. That's what they're hearing. That's the beautiful music that they're hearing. They're seeing that spiritual force which we're talking about pulsating beneath creation. If this makes them appear mad to those with less sensitive ears, should they therefore cease to dance? Of course not, right? That's the insanity. The insanity would be stopping the dance because someone else can't hear the music that you hear. The more you continue to meditate on this idea, this soul of reality, the more we actually begin to feel God's presence. Okay, and that obviously is what we've been talking about every lesson until now in this course. The idea that meditation actually begins to make this more of a reality in your life, taking something from the realm of just philosophy. And the more you think about it, particularly through the Hitbonenut meditations, the more you think about it, the more you contemplate, the more you allow it to sink in and perceive it from different angles, the more you begin to actually live it that way. Let me give you another example at the risk of seeming exhausted. Imagine that you're in a situation, and you can choose whatever situation you want, where you are very close to someone that you love, and you're holding their hand, but you cannot see their face, and you cannot communicate with them. The only thing you can do is feel the warmth of their skin and the tremor of their muscles in your hand, right? So very often this happens to people, hopefully not on this Zoom, that have a loved one who's very, very ill, right? So for whatever reason, they can't see them, they can't talk to them, but they can hold their hand, or they have to turn away, but they're holding their hand, etc. Right? And the whole communication is happening, or they're in a very dark room and they're holding their hand, right? I noticed last night, yesterday was President's Day, Menachem had off from school, which is one of the reasons why we didn't have class yesterday. So Gitti and I took him to his first ever concert. Now, this was the first time it occurred to me that a concert is very, very overwhelming on the senses. He's heard music all the time in the car and in the house, etc. But take a 4-year-old to a concert, and I'm talking about a proper professional concert, with the booming boom boxes and the lights and the screens and the way they do concerts these days. You know what I mean? And like for the first few minutes, he was like he couldn't move, and he was holding my hand on one side and Gitti's hand on the other side, and just like, so again, there's that feeling of holding someone's hand. What does that do? Okay, so let's just analyze this for a moment. I know we do it all the time. We probably don't often think about what it means when we hold someone's hand, but let's think about it for a second. Just like with the shaking of the hand, right? When you shake someone's hand to have some sort of agreement, the desire here isn't to hold something warm that happens to vibrate a little bit, that happens to have a little bit of pulsation in it, right? Which is essentially physically, I'm describing a hand, right? A hand that's alive. But that's not the desire. The desire is to hold the hand of someone that in your mind that you're holding someone who you love, who cares about you, is holding your hand, etc. And in this way, communicating their closeness for you, etc. Right? But you don't see them, and you can't communicate with them, and you don't see their face, and you don't see their emotions, and you don't even, nothing, you can't even see their eyes. Right? So what does it help that you're just holding their hand? Because by holding their hand, essentially what you're doing is you're connecting with their soul, right? You're connecting with their identity, with the spiritual force that is inside of them. It was never about their body, right? It was always about the person themselves. There's something that transcends the body, that's something that's beyond there. By holding the hand, through that you feel the closeness to that being, that soul that there is, the spiritual force that there is beneath the physical body of the human being. Everybody with me here? I think this is pretty straightforward what I'm saying, right? Nobody. Imagine scientists would come up with, I think they did, prosthetic hands, right? They would have one that even feels warm and feels like a hand and everything. And you would tell the child, don't worry, you're going into surgery now. Your mom is not available right now to hold your hand, but we brought you a prosthetic hand for you to hold. It's ridiculous, right? Because he's not holding the hand. He's really essentially establishing a closeness with his mother. Similarly, the key to life in general is to hold God's hand, to recognize that through one element of creation, with enough meditation, with enough internalizing of this idea, we can sense the godliness that there is in this moment. We can sense the godliness that there is in this element of the world, in this piece of creation, whatever it might be. It can literally be anything. It can be a beautiful flower. It can be a stone. It can be a human being. It can be an animal. It can be an experience. It can be anything. If we just choose to look beneath the surface and see God there, then all of a sudden the whole thing becomes much more, it affects us much more. And this is why the Baal Shem Tov, Danny, if I can ask you to read for us, please, text 7 on page 89, the Baal Shem Tov, it encouraged his Hasidim to not just know this idea, but to meditate on this idea.
Meditate on the fact that the divine presence fills the entire universe and that God's intimate presence is with you constantly. This will allow you to be constantly joyful, realizing and believing with perfect faith that the divine presence is with you, protecting you. Realize that you are gazing at the divine and that God is gazing at you. God can do as he pleases and is the source of all the goodness and suffering in the world, for his divinity and sustaining force is within each item of existence.
You know, there was he just passed away, I think 2 years ago or last year, Rabbi Adin Even Yisrael Steinsaltz. Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, anybody hear of him? Yeah.
The book, he wrote the Chumash.
He wrote a Chumash. He translated the Talmud as well. Oh, you're talking about the Koren Chumash, yes? Yes.
Steinsaltz edition.
Steinsaltz edition of the Chumash. He also has the Talmud. He translated the entire Talmud. Not just translated, but elucidated the entire Talmud. Anyways, he also wrote a biography of the Rebbe. He was a Chabad Chassid. He was also a prolific thinker and writer, etc. Anyways, he once came to the Rebbe to New York, and I forget what it was. I think it was like for the holidays, maybe for Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. He wanted to spend it together with the Rebbe. Anyways, he came by, whether in a private audience or at some time, to speak to the Rebbe. And the Rebbe asked him, how his wife was. So he replied that she was fine, thank God, but that she had not come with him, and he had come alone to New York. For those of you that know enough about the Rebbe, you see where the story is going. The Rebbe paused him, interrupted him, and said, "Hold on. How can you say that you came alone to New York? Wherever a Jew is never alone. God is always with him." Now, you hear the story. I'm sharing the story, by the way. I'm sure you'll hear it again in a year from now in a sermon, or you might have heard it a year ago in a sermon, or something to that equivalent. You're never alone. God is with you, etc. Right? It sounds like a cliche. It's a good line that you tell somebody when they're afraid, when they're not feeling well, don't worry, God is with you, God cares about you, etc. But thinking about it in the context of this class, as a philosophical idea that we're hoping can actually begin to affect the way we see the world, it becomes much more powerful. It's not just that we're not alone. Because God is here in every single moment, in every single element of creation. In fact, Shulchan Aruch, which is the Jewish code of law, begins with a one-liner. It says that every single day a person is to think, and by the way, if you walk into some synagogues, they have in Chabad we don't, because we believe that it's inscribed upon your heart, not on the podium. But if in some shuls, in some synagogues, if you go maybe on top of the ark, or on top of the chazen's, like the cantor's station, they'll have these words inscribed. It comes from Shulchan Aruch. It comes from the code of Jewish law. What is the line? The line is Shaviti Hashem lenegdi tamid. That God, your presence is constantly before me. Right? But it's a much deeper idea. Lisa, can you read text 8 for us? Page 90, again from the Baal Shem Tov.
It is a tremendous achievement to constantly meditate on the fact that we are close to God and that we are literally and entirely encompassed by his presence. We should try to remain connected to this reality to the extent that reflection becomes unnecessary because we mentally envision God everywhere, constantly. At that point, we see that God is the place of the world. He pre-exists all of existence, and all of existence exists within God. This includes, of course, each of us as well. With this meditation, we fulfill the directive recorded in the Code of Jewish Law to set God before us at all times.
So this is a very powerful appreciation of that statement, to set God before us at all times. Think about it. If you would have read this without the full context of what we're talking about here, you'd be like, okay, God isn't always with me or always in this moment, etc. But the Shulchan Aruch, the Jewish Code of Law, is saying that we should always feel as if God is with us. Why? Because he could be with us at any moment, because he is it. But now we're saying a much deeper point. We're saying that God is everywhere and is everything. And if that's because he is the spiritual, it is the spiritual force beneath creation. And that's a very, very powerful point. That means that when we say God is before us, we're essentially talking about God himself. For those of you that have been here in the past, you know that in the Zoom class, I have a custom that I like to tell. I like to tell you guys what the menu is tonight, like that you should feel like you're at least missing out on something from the in-person experience. But today I don't need to do that, although we are serving sushi tonight. So if you want to come, you're welcome to come and join us, or come and get sushi and leave, whatever you want. But tonight we don't need to do that, because unfortunately this next meditation is not going to be as powerful, but hopefully it'll be powerful enough. Why? Because in person, I hope that we'll have a flower sitting in front of each person's spot, that we can use that as a prop or an anchor for the following meditation. Allow me to reintroduce Rabbi Leibel Wolf, and please turn your attention to the video screen.
Design underlies every aspect of creation. It's quite amazing that as you note the world, you find that everything possesses an element of design. Doctors, scientists, artists all point to the fact that design creates for them the pattern of what their work is all about. Underlying design is a designer. Keep that in mind. Lift your flower and observe it. Have a good look at it. Look at the petals. See the thin veins, the pattern inscribed. Beyond the petals, look deep within, and you might see the ovule, deeply embedded within, from which grows the stigma. Amazing, every flower with the same elements. Gently close your eyes and bring to mind that flower that you have in your hand. Become aware of its exquisite color, a shade that's difficult to verbalize. And remember, every flower is subtly different, designed subtly differently. Raise the flower to your nose. What is its scent? Its perfume? If you were to find a word to describe that scent, what would it be? Touch one of the petals. Press it lightly. Feel its texture. Soft. It may even be furry. Its unique texture. In your mind's eye, imagine a bee flying into the flower, looking for the pollen deep within, buzzing with satisfaction. Listen to that buzz. A flower is one of the most sensuous creations that God has made in the universe. You are that flower. You have a pattern, a unique pattern, a unique structure. You are a flower that God has created in His garden, in its garden, in her garden. Admire the you that possesses so many aspects of clear design. And design means purpose. You have been designed for your purpose. The world is a flower. The world possesses design. The world is purposeful. At all times, be aware, be mindful of the innate beauty and uniqueness of design in the world, in creation. And that way, relate to the designer and the purpose God has for you individually.
The more we meditate on this idea, and the more we allow it to actually sink into our consciousness, all of a sudden we find ourselves needing to think about it less. I know people like this. I try to be like this whenever I can. That you walk around with glasses that have a particular color, like it's like everything is seen through the tint of that color. Any item that you see, it's not you. God created the world so we don't see it naturally. It doesn't bounce out at us immediately. But upon just a little bit of meditation, we begin to appreciate the divine energy that there is beneath everything. And the more we meditate about it, the more that becomes the natural way that we see things. There are certain aspects in life when we do this naturally, right? Think about a painting, for example. There isn't a single one of you that would just look at a painting and just look at it as colors on canvas. You look at the painting and you feel the artist beneath the painting. You feel that. You feel his expression, his emotion, what he was trying to communicate, etc. Without anybody needing to tell you that, right? And maybe even if you'll never become aware of who that artist is, you're connecting with something that artist was attempting to communicate with you through this painting. And you would never look at the painting and just say, it's a painting. Right? Or if you did, obviously you're not appreciating it for anything more than the physical paint on canvas. Okay. But let's say we've reached this stage, all right? We meditate on it long enough, whether you do this once a day, 5 times a day, or on some sort of regimen where it eventually becomes part of you. The next question is, so what? So God is everything. So there's a godly energy behind everything. This can of sparkling water, essentially there's godly energy behind it. This computer, this Zoom experience, this paper, this pen, everything, there's godly energy beneath it. There's God beneath it, and I can sense him beneath it. The next step in the equation is to appreciate, just as the soul with the body, right? Nobody looks at the soul of an experience or the soul of a human being and says, so what? All right, so there's a soul, I get it. But when I'm talking to Danny Levin, I'm talking to his nose. I'm not talking to his soul. Nobody says that, right? Obviously, part of that analogy is the soul is the conscious actor in the definition here. The godliness of everything isn't just happens to be that way. No, that is the purpose behind it. Text 9, which comes to us from Tehillim, and Ron, if I can ask you to read for us, please. We're on page 91. Text 9 in Tehillim, King David in Psalms, King David is trying to give us an appreciation for the fact that God is not just found in everything, but he actually actively, consciously acts through everything. Go ahead.
He covers the heavens with clouds, prepares rain for the earth, and causes mountains to sprout grass. He gives an animal its food, and as well to the hungry young ravens that call out.
King David is proposing that nothing in this world just happens. Even what we perceive to be the natural order of things, right? There is no such thing as natural order, right? A leaf exists because of the divine energy that pulsates beneath it. And the journey that a leaf will take, whether it will be pulled off by a child, as we mentioned earlier, or blown away in the wind, if it will end up being used in to form some sort of tea, or as a decoration at a wedding, or as a prop in a nursery school, that leaf's journey is determined by the soul, by the spiritual force that is pulsating beneath it. One way of looking at nature, and many people do this, I know, and this is something that many people have meditations for, is to appreciate that the different elements that there are in nature are essentially just a series of miracles. Just because something happens all the time doesn't mean that there isn't a designer, right? Human beings are prone to failure, or are prone to mistakes. So therefore, we have a hard time believing that something is done by a human being if it has consistency, that every single day at the exact same time, it's almost robotic, right? But that doesn't mean that there isn't something behind it. The sun rises every morning, right? Women give birth to children around the world. All the things that we call nature, but essentially, when you look at it beneath the surface, you recognize that there's something miraculous about this. There is something godly behind this. By the way, the Maharal of Prague actually points out that that's why, as Jews, we are commanded. Raise your hand if you're familiar with these blessings. So I assume everybody's familiar with the fact that we make blessings on food, and then we make blessings every time we do a mitzvah. But there is another type of blessing. There's a blessing we make on thunder, on lightning. Anybody familiar with these blessings? When you see a rainbow, an earthquake. Anyways, no, I'm not asking if you're familiar, like if you know the entire blessing, Danny. I'm saying you're familiar with this concept, right? What the Maharal points out, that the reason we are commanded to make blessings on these things is because we're commanded to look at nature and recognize that even though this rainbow is a natural occurrence, right? And we've all been in high school, and honestly, before high school, and they've explained to us how rainbows operate, at least to a certain degree, etc. But the fact that we can explain it naturally, there's a chemical reaction that makes this or that happen, doesn't mean that there isn't something behind it. The question just gets extended slightly further. So who made that chemical reaction happen? Who caused this particular, this cloud and thunder and precipitation and all the different things there are? And so the Maharal of Prague points out, he says, that's why we make blessings on these things. We can't make a blessing on every single thing that happens. We can't make a blessing for our hands moving, and for, even though we do that too. We do make a blessing in the mornings, right? Reminds me of on Fiddler on the Roof, right? When he says there's a blessing for everything. What's the blessing for the Tsar? Right? Everybody watch Fiddler on the Roof. We can do a screening if we need to.
Okay.
I mean, all right, good. Just making sure. But we do have a blessing every once in a while on something that seems inherently natural, but that we are being reminded, no, look beneath the nature. There's a godly force behind there. Now, every once in a while, we're awoken to this, right? Because every once in a while, we have expectations for how things are supposed to run, whether it's our own personal plans or whether it's major natural phenomena. And then God has other plans, right? Like they say. Not they say. I think it was Woody Allen, right? Was it Woody Allen? Did anybody ever hear this before? I think he said, if you want to make God laugh, tell him about your plans. Right? Has anybody ever heard that? I think it was attributed to Woody Allen. You've heard that before, Ron? I think so. So every once in a while, those moments when our plans change, right? And obviously plans changing, meaning that we had a certain expectation for what was going to happen, and then it changed based on the way we expected things to play out. God had a different plan for how things were supposed to play out. Every once in a while, we see that there is this godly energy, there is this spiritual force behind things that are making things happen. Now, what is the benefit of this? Yeah, Danny is pointing out, yes, the Yiddish expression, a Mensch tracht und Gott lacht. Man plans and God laughs, 100%. That's probably where Woody Allen got it from. I don't know, or maybe the Yiddish Proverbs got it from Woody Allen. I'm not sure. One way or the other, I don't want to rule anything out. Okay. Anyways, so, and those experiences wake us up to the fact that there is a spiritual force beneath everything. Now, this awareness, becoming aware of the fact there is a godly energy underneath everything, changes our perspective and now begins to change our emotional reaction to it. Why? Because let's talk about it. Almost every single negative feeling, whether it's anger, sadness, depression, whatever it is, comes as a result of the fact that we had an expectation of the way things were supposed to be. Whether that expectation is of someone else and they disappointed us, or of something else and that thing that experienced disappointed us, or whether that expectation is of ourselves and we disappointed ourselves. Regardless, that's how every negative feeling comes about. Danny, you'll be familiar with this from the Warrior to Warrior course. There is an expectation, and then an unmet expectation results in a negative feeling. If we can change that perspective, as we'll see in just a moment in text 10, and appreciate that this expectation, that this result, which didn't meet our expectation, was perfectly in line with someone else's expectations, namely the divine plan, and that there's a plan here, it strengthens our ability to accept it and to be more resilient in the face of things going wrong. Appreciating that somebody has a plan. Ron, if I can ask you please to read for us text 10. We're on page 93. This is a letter of the Rebbe, and it has some very powerful advice for those dealing with anxiety, etc.
With reference to your writing about doubts and difficulty and about a feeling of insecurity in general, I trust it is unnecessary to elaborate to you at length that such feelings arise when a person thinks that he is alone and can only rely upon himself and his own judgment, and therefore feels doubtful and insecure about each move he has to make. And while he also trusts in God, this trust is somehow superficial, without permeating him and his way of life in every detail. And only on certain days, such as the high holidays, he feels more close to God. But when a person's faith in God is deep, and when he reflects that God's benevolent providence extends to each and every person, and to each and every detail, and each and every minute, surely he must develop a profound sense of security and confidence. The concept of divine providence is better understood in the original term of hashgacha
pratis. Okay. Now, hashgacha pratis. One second, Ron. Hashgacha pratis will literally be translated as divine providence. Okay. But the Rebbe wants to point out that the specific words in Hebrew being used have a very powerful connotation. Go for it.
For hashgacha pratis means careful watchfulness, for which reason the term hashkosh is used also in connection with the law of kashrut, where
hold on. That same word that we're using for providence, right? Hashgacha, the Rebbe is translating it instead of providence as watchfulness, okay? And he's pointing out that we use that same word hashgacha, okay, for, you know what hashgacha means in Hebrew? The OU symbol on a kosher food item, or the OK symbol on a kosher food item is called a hashgacha, okay? Why is that? You may have heard the term mashgiach. That's because there's a mashgiach, there is a person whose job it is to be the overseer or the watcher in the factory to make sure that there are only kosher ingredients and kosher, kosher processes used in the process of making this food. Okay, where every detail has to be carefully watched. Okay, go for it.
Hashkokash is used also in the connection with the law of kashrus, where every detail has to be carefully watched. Nor is another translation, which is sometimes used in connection with Hashkokash protis, namely supervision, entirely satisfactory in this case, because supervision implies overseeing. That is to say, seeing from above, whereas Hashkokash, in the sense of God's watchfulness, means knowing matters through and through. The belief in such Hashkokash pratis is basis to our religion and way of life. So much so that before every new year and during the beginning of the new year, we say twice daily Psalm 27. God is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? God is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? From this, it follows that even if things happen not as desired according to human calculations, and even if it seems that even according to the Torah, it should have been different, a Jew still puts his trust in God.
The point here is that it's not just, right? Let's go through the steps we've done so far. Last week, we spoke about everything having the soul. Everything has some sort of spiritual force underneath it that animates it and that makes it what it is. That was step one. Step two is, what is that spiritual force? That is God. So there's a godly element that underlies everything. But now we're introducing another point. It's not just that everything has godliness in it. As a result of the fact that there is godliness in everything, everything has a purpose. Everything is on purpose. God has a plan for what is supposed to happen with this particular thing. Like one who oversees something, God oversees the details of creation, and every single one of them has an element for exactly why it plays out in this way. The Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Chassidus, who was one of the originators of this idea, was once teaching this to his students. And one of his students asked, so Rebbe, why did this leaf fall down on the floor? So, has anybody ever heard this story before? Because he's essentially making the argument that every single leaf, and the way it falls and the pattern that it follows and where it ends up, is essentially following its journey the way God intended for it. So Baal Shem Tov got very serious, and he started to take them on a journey. He said, let's ask the branch that knocked the leaf down. Miraculously, the branch started to speak. They began to appreciate that the branch had no say in the matter. The branch only waved in the wind because the tree gave a flutter. So they asked the tree, why did you tremble? So he said, it's not my fault. It's the wind. The wind was blowing. Right? So he goes to the wind and he says, the wind, why did you decide to blow? He says, I have an angel that tells me when to blow. Whenever the angel says to blow, I blow. Right? So he goes back to the angel, and the angel says, you asking me why I made the wind blow? Hashem, God told me to blow, so I blew, and that made the tree sway, and that made the twig flutter, and that made the leaf fall down on the ground. So finally, the Baal Shem Tov comes to God himself, and he says, what's going on? Like, why this whole process to make this leaf fall down on the floor? So Hashem tells him, he says, pick the leaf up off the ground, and you'll see. And the tzaddik picks the leaf up off the ground, and he sees that on the ground is crawling along an inchworm. And Hashem says, God tells him, this inchworm complained to me. And he said it was boiling hot, that he couldn't bear the heat. So I dispatched the angel to go make the wind blow, to go make the tree sway, to make the twig flutter, to make the leaf fall down. Like that, this inchworm should be warm. And then he was able to curl up and go to sleep or whatever it was, right? Now, this is obviously one situation in which they were enlightened and they were told the reason why this is happening. We often have moments in our lives when life doesn't go as planned, and we see why, whether we like it or we don't like it, etc. But we see why. But here's the real kicker. The real kicker is that why doesn't make a difference. Okay, now, obviously it's helpful. It's helpful to know why. It's easier to know, it's easier to like something and be on board with something. As American author Byron Katie summed it up, author of 1,000 Names for Joy. Life is simple. Everything happens for you, not to you. Everything happens at exactly the right moment, neither too soon nor too late. You don't have to like it. It's just easier if you do. In other words, it's easier, obviously, if we can get on board with everything and appreciate everything. But even if we can't, think about how how meaningful it is to appreciate that somebody does, that there is a reason to it. Because we appreciate that there is a godly energy, and that godly energy is doing things on purpose and for a specific plan, that already helps. Okay, right now, I may or may not become privy to that information. We're not trying to play God here and become God and understand everything in the world and why they happen. What we are trying to do is meditate on an idea that God does appreciate everything that's going on, and then that makes us feel much more resilient, much more, we can cope with much more in life because we know that there is a plan. In Hebrew, this is known as bitachon. It's not faith in God. It's not belief in God. It's trust in God. You're not saying you're willing to do anything even if there's no plan. You're saying there is a plan. I'm just not familiar with it. And I'm willing to trust. You know, like you trust your spouse. If they plan date night and you get in the car and you don't know where you're going, you trust. You know what I mean? Like somebody does have a plan. And in this case, that's Hashem. I was watching a commencement address. I forget which university it was. It was Jim Carrey giving the address, and it was interesting to me to hear him say what essentially we know to be true from a Torah perspective. To hear him say it just of his own accord, he said, and he was talking about the same idea. He says, and he says as follows: when I say life doesn't happen to you, it happens for you. He says, I don't know if it's true. I don't know if it's true. He says, I'm just saying that, and it helps me make a conscious decision to live life that way and to be able to overcome challenges. In other words, it helps me deal with the challenges that there are in life in the most productive way possible. What can I do now? Why? Because everything in life is not happening to me by chance, but it's happening for me. There's some sort of mission, some sort of purpose that's going on here. And if you'd like to, we're not going to do that much time on this now, but if you'd like to, you can do the exercise on page 95, which is to identify a recent experience that triggered a negative emotion and make note of it. And then pause for a moment, reflect on what happened, and consider that it was specifically designed by God. You may not know why, but it was supposed to be. And then afterwards, record how you feel about the same matter post-reflection. In other words, think about a negative feeling that came up, why it came up, etc. And then just try to meditate on this idea that we're talking about today, which soon will be led in a guided meditation. But for now, you could just take a moment to think about it, and then that should change what your reaction is to it. Okay. But I want to conclude with one final idea. How much time do I have left here? 17 minutes. I think we should have enough time. In the remaining 17 minutes, I'd like to take this one step forward. So far, what do we have? Step one, everything has a soul. Everything has a purpose. Everything has a spiritual force pulsating beneath it. Step two, that spiritual force is God. Step three, everything that God does is on purpose. It's by design. There's a designer, and he's doing things by design. And step four now is to appreciate that everything matters as part of the plan. I know that might seem like an intuitive next step, like, oh, everything God does is for a purpose. That means that everything matters. But that's not entirely true, right? We do things all the time, and we do things on purpose, presumably, but there are some things that matter to us, some things that don't matter to us. So the last step of the puzzle is to appreciate that everything in this world also matters, which brings us to text 11. Danny, if you can, please. We're on page 97.
The Baal Shem Tov taught that divine providence does not only mean that God orchestrates the individual movement of each of the manifold created entities, and that the same providence is actually determining the existence and life of that entity. It also means that the particular movement of a single entity bears a direct impact on the overall purpose of creation. Take, for example, the slightest quiver of a solitary sliver of a plant flourishing in the belly of the forest, or upon some tremendous mountain, or in one of our planet's deepest valleys that has never been traversed by a human. The plant's movements to the right, to the left, forward or backward throughout the duration of its lifespan are actively determined by ongoing divine providence. God has issued a specific decree. This particular plant will live for a specific amount of months, days, and hours, and that during this time it will turn and bend in these directions a certain number of times. Beyond all that, however, each of these particular movements is significant for the overall purpose of creation. Through the combination and synthesis of all the myriad particular occurrences involving countless millions of species and subdivisions that exist within all of the four kingdoms, the sublime divine intent that underpins all of creation is consummated. Not only is every feature of every entity divinely orchestrated, it plays an indispensable role in the divine purpose of creation.
This is such an awesome idea, and like it's so radical that it almost seems unfathomable. You're telling me that every single blade of grass, every single vein, and every single leaf, and everything is all orchestrated by God. And so okay, maybe I can get on board with the idea that God orchestrates it, because it's definitely tied in with the idea that God can do much more than human beings can do, right? So okay, I can't really fathom that because I'm a human being. But now you're telling me they all fit according to the plan that God has for this world? So one way of appreciating this idea is figure 3.2. So on page 98, for those who have the book. What you should have in front of you, and I'll try to pull up on the screen whatever they have. I don't think they have, oh, Danny, you're showing this? Hold on. And let me stop the share, and I'll spotlight here. Danny, go ahead. You do that. Can you, right?
Oh, you know.
You guys see Danny in big? Oh, it's blurring
It's blurry. It's blurry.
All right, that's okay. It's the feature.
It's looking for a human shape to focus on.
Oh well, okay. The point that we're trying to make with this image, and for those of you that have the book, you'll see it in figure 3.2, and those of you that don't, you'll see it when you get the book. What you have in front of you is an image of a tree. Okay, the thing is that the tree, or at least the picture of the tree, is extremely pixelated. Okay, and it's pixelated for a reason. Why? Because as human beings, oh, there you go. Now we see it. Okay. I think it's also hard to appreciate when it's only in an image. Anyways, but the idea is that every single pixel that's part of this tree matters to this image, to this picture of a tree. If one pixel would be missing, all of a sudden you would see and you say there's something wrong there. For the general picture of the full tree or whatever picture it might be to come across, you need every single pixel. And if one pixel is missing, you know, perhaps somebody might not notice it if they're to the untrained eye or whatever, but upon further examination, you would notice, you would see there's something missing to the entire plan. Using this analogy, we can appreciate, excuse me, the way that every single element in creation matters, right? Again, let's watch that. This one pixel, isolated and looking at it as one little thing, might not give any sort of, you know, like whatever, it's a little orange pixel, what does it mean, right? But when you see the full picture, each moment begins to have purpose in creation, right? Every single pixel, no matter what it is part of it. Envision this one, this image, without that one pixel that we saw originally, right? That's all we would notice, just the one pixel that's missing. That's because every single pixel matters in the grander scheme of creation. And now we get to the most powerful element of it all. We can apply this to ourselves. If everything in the world is on purpose, every blade of grass, the path that every leaf follows when it falls to the ground, right? And every bee and the nectar and everything has a purpose in creation, then surely our existence is also a part of that beautiful painting, also plays a role. And this is where we get to the last step of all. Again, step one, everything has a soul, a spiritual energy that animates. Step two, that spiritual energy is God. Step three, God does it all on purpose, right? He does everything on purpose. And step four, everything matters. Then by a very extension of that, the more we meditate upon that, we realize I matter. The actions that I do in this world make a difference. How often do we tell ourselves the opposite? I'm going to take my one can and put it in a recycling bin instead of in a trash bin, and that's going to save the icebergs and a lot. Yes. When we do one thing, right? How does the Rambam put it? The one action we do can literally bring Mashiach. How does that work? One mitzvah can bring. The more we appreciate that there's a godly energy that pulsates beneath everything, the more we appreciate how much we actually matter. As Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen elaborates. Lisa, if you can read for us, please, text 12.
Just as we are enjoined to believe in God, so must we subsequently believe in ourselves. In other words, we must believe that God has provided us with a mission in life, and our lives are not meaningless, but rather our souls come from God, the source of life, and God is delighted and satisfied when we execute his will.
Can I just repeat that first line, if you don't mind, Lisa? I'm going to repeat that first line again. Just as we are enjoined to believe in God, so must we, and I'll take out this word for a second, so must we believe in ourselves. And that word is subsequently. And that, in a nutshell, is the entire point I'm trying to communicate in this lesson. Again, just as we are enjoined to believe in God, so must we subsequently believe in ourselves. If we truly believe in God, if we truly believe that every single element of creation pulsates with godliness, if we truly believe that God acts with purpose and that everything matters in the grand tapestry that is the beautiful painting that God has made of life, then the little tiny pixel that is me subsequently matters. And subsequently, I must believe in myself. Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen is telling us that if you want to keep the first commandment of the 10 commandments properly, I am the Lord your God, to believe in one true God, then you must believe in yourself. And that is such a powerful point. And it's powerful right now only philosophically, and it will disappear in 5 minutes if you don't take time to actually meditate on it and allow it to sink in, etc. And that's exactly where we're going with this. Let's finish off text 13, and then we'll go directly to the meditation. Ron, can I ask you to read again, please? Text 13. Go for it. Page 100.
We should recognize and fully appreciate that our travels to various locations are not random. Each journey is specifically directed by God. The divine intention in orchestrating these journeys is that each individual has been allowed a specific portion of the material world to spiritually rectify. Our portions are in specific locations to which we must journey. We accomplish these acts of rectification in a variety of ways, such as through studying Torah or praying in that location, or through eating, drinking, and sleeping there for the sake of properly serving God, or through another means of performing God's will in that place. The Baal Shem Tov associated this concept with the verse, God establishes the steps of man, meaning that a person desires to relocate to a specific place is actually inspired by God for the purpose of that individual to engage in a particular aspect of divine service, thereby rectifying whatever this person has been appointed to rectify. Therefore, when we arrive at any given location, we must reflect on this deeper reality and challenge ourselves. Why am I here? It is certainly not random. For what achievement did God lead me to this spot?
Imagine if you lived your life like this at every single moment of your life. Nothing is random. You make a wrong turn, right? Maybe this only happens to me. I'm sure all of you are perfect drivers. But to me, every once in a while, the GPS says, go make a right. And I ended up in the left turn. So I need to make a left turn because that's where I ended up, right? And every part of us screams, oh, it's random, whatever. You made a mistake, you idiot. What are you doing? Like, you should have paid more attention. You were distracted, whatever, right? That's what we yell. But properly appreciating the meditation of this class is to say, no, I'm in this moment. I made this left turn because for whatever reason. But it's part of a master plan. There's never a moment in my life when I don't matter. There's never a moment in my life which wasn't orchestrated by God that I should be here doing what I do here. And this applies. This is the brilliance of this idea. I asked you, what would happen if we walked around every moment of life thinking this way? You know what would happen? You would achieve true freedom. You would achieve true freedom. Why? Why? Because this applies in every single circumstance. I'll start by using an instance that we can all relate with, and then I'll go to extreme situations, which hopefully no one here has ever been in. Firstly, on a simple level, right? On a mental health level, we often get ourselves into this loop, whether you want to call it depression or if it's just a bad day or whatever it is. It's almost always built on the idea that I got myself to a certain spot. I did something, I brought myself somewhere, or circumstances brought me somewhere. I got into a car accident today, and therefore it's a bad day, etc. And that led my day askew. Imagine if, after a series of 3/4 of a day going by, and it's literally the worst day in your entire life, right? You stopped for 3 minutes and meditated on this point. Everything in this world has a godly energy that pulsates beneath it. It's acting purposefully, and every single thing that it's creating and doing and causing to have its journey matters. And as a result, I matter. The situation in which I am in, matters to Hashem, matters to the world, matters to the whole purpose of creation. All of a sudden, you look at yourself, you say, hold on, I'm depressed? Yeah, okay. I got to this place of depression today, and in this place, there's something for me to do. Oh, I had a car accident and this and that and whatever, and maybe I'm laying in a hospital bed. There's something here for me to do. There's something about this moment in time and something about this part of my life that matters. That's a very redeeming thought. It's redeeming from our emotions, from our negative emotions, but it's also redeeming, very, very powerfully so, from any abuser. Okay? Now I'm going to give you 3 examples of real life human beings that I encountered through my readings. All of them the same idea, and all of them hopefully in situations that we will never be in. Let me start with Rabbi Mendel Futterfass. Rabbi Mendel Futterfass was a chassid who passed away in 1995. He was imprisoned in a Siberian labor camp, right? In a labor camp in Siberia by the former Soviet Union, for the great crime of presenting a threat to the Soviet ideology by being a religious Jew. Anyways, suffice it to say that in Siberia, his fellow laborers in the labor camp, in the gulags, right, were not exactly the most pleasant of fellows. And Rabbi Mendel Futterfass was notorious for having a pleasant and upbeat attitude despite being in the Siberian labor camp. And I will quote to you from a book that I read of his. It's in Hebrew, so I tried my best to translate it. He writes as follows, that he once had a conversation with the group of other inmates, and he said to them, you are all, they asked him, how's it possible for him to be happy? And he said, you are all dejected because your incarceration prevents you from materializing your life's goals. In other words, you believe that right now you're supposed to be a scientist or an engineer or I don't know what, or a mother or a father or whatever it is. And that's what your goal is in life. That's your expectation of life. And because you can't materialize your goal because of some Stalin and his henchmen, right? So therefore you are dejected. He says, my goal in life is to serve God. And then I can do whatever I may be. In other words, he believed that he was in Siberia because that's where he was supposed to be, and that's how he was supposed to be serving God. One example, okay? A lot of you are thinking this is a religious fellow. It's not for me. I'm not as religious as him. I'm not as committed that way, all right? So allow me to bring you an example from Edith Eger. Raise your hand if you've read her book, The Choice. This is in English, this book. Highly, highly recommend. Edith Eger was a Holocaust survivor. I shouldn't say was, she is. Thank God she's alive and well, I think. She must be pushing 90 or something like that. Can I know her? But she lives to be well. She lives in La Jolla, California. And what's unique about her book and why I read it, like 3 years ago I read it, is because I've read obviously many Holocaust, like I'm sure everyone on this Zoom, I've read many Holocaust memoirs. What's unique about hers is that she jumps back and forth between her Holocaust memories and her practice. She went on to become a psychologist and a therapist, and to have many patients throughout her life. And she would use her experiences to inform how she would guide her patients. She was very close to Viktor Frankl, the works. One of my favorite stories from the book, horrific story where she's in the barracks, and I think Mengele, Yimach Shemoy, may his name be obliterated, heard that she was a dancer. She was like a ballerina or something. It's a young girl. She was in her teens at the time. You read the book, Lisa?
Yeah, and we had her also give her
We had her speak?
an event. Yeah,
Very nice. I'd love to bring her down. One day I hope.
She was incredible.
I think she would be incredible. Anyways, so he had her dance for him. And she remembers that while she was dancing for him, one thought kept echoing over and over again in her mind, something that her mother had told her before she said goodbye to her. And that was, she said, Edka, nobody can take away from you whatever you put in your mind. And she went to a space while she was dancing for Mengele, that in her mind, she was dancing on the, I don't know, I think she was Austria, I think, right? Or I can't remember exactly where she was from. That she was on a concert stage and there were thousands of people watching her and she performed the whole thing beautifully and she landed and everybody was clapping. That's where she was in her mind, right? She says that when she finished dancing and she opened her eyes, she looked at Mengele and she said, the feeling I had shocked me to my core. She said, the feeling I had was pity. She was looking at him. Imagine the freedom that this does, that this gives a human being. She was looking at him and saying, you are imprisoned. Why? Because you've created this monster out of yourself to be a murderer and a sadist, and all the things that we know that the Nazis and especially Mengele were. And you've imprisoned yourself to that identity. Whereas, so it doesn't make a difference that you're in a pressed uniform and you can walk around freely and you can do whatever you want. You're not free to yourself. Whereas because in my mind, I know that I'm living for something higher and that you can never take away from me. A sense of purpose is something you can never take away from someone. And I'll share one more story. It's not really a story, it's a whole book. For those of you that are familiar with Shalom Mordechai Rabashkin, Shalom Mordechai Rabashkin is a man who suffered tremendously. He's probably in his 50s now. And he's a father of a good friend of mine, who I went to yeshiva with. And he was formerly the CEO of Agri Processors, which was a kosher slaughterhouse in Iowa. And I do have to give a slight disclaimer here, because I know that there are many people that by no fault of their own, only have information about him because they watched a television show called American Greed, or perhaps they read some other articles, et cetera, that spun the story a particular way. And I would encourage you to read the story from his words, because in 2017, his sentence was commuted by President Trump, and he was released as a free man. But he spent 8 years in the federal prison system, even if he was completely guilty of all the crimes that they were accusing him of. He received a ridiculous sentence. There was a tremendous amount of anti-Semitism that went along throughout his story. Without getting into all the details, if you want to, you can read the book. It's called Shalom Mordechai Rabashkin, or just Rabashkin, Rubashkin. I can link it if you'd like. Rabashkin, the inside story. What I love about the book is, throughout the entire book, he doesn't mention a single name, not of anti-Semitic prosecutors or anti-Semitic DAs, anti-Semitic judges who clearly voiced anti-Semitism in the courtroom, etc. He doesn't mention a single name. Instead, the entire book is full of him expressing his belief and trust in Hashem. And he goes through stories where he was brutally beaten for wanting to wear a yarmulke and tzitzis, for wanting to wear a kippah and tzitzit in prison, even though it had been arranged in advance and the prisons had been warned that he's coming and that it's his religious right, and according to American law, even in prison, a human being is entitled to their religion and is able to wear a yarmulke and tzitzit, etc. Anyways, without getting into all the details, he also talks about this. It's mind-boggling. I mean, he's like in Otisville in terrible conditions, etc. And he talks about being free, about celebrating Passover, for example. The holiday of freedom. Can you imagine what a depressing holiday that must be to celebrate in prison? But all three of these human beings had one thing in common. In their minds, they were focused. I don't know if they meditated every day on it or not. Ideally, they would have. That under brutal conditions, if there's one thing that nobody can take away from you, it's the idea that you matter. It's the idea that God put you in this position. Nobody else, not the prison system, not Stalin, not the Gulag system, not the Nazis, Yimach Shemam, and none of this. It wasn't them. You see this language in all three of their books, by the way. In all three of their books, you see the same language, that they were not under this false impression that some sadist or some sort of anti-Semite or some sort of terrible abuser is the one who put them in this situation. Instead, they viewed themselves as being in a situation placed by God. And in this situation, there's something that their soul is supposed to do. And that's a tremendous sense of identity that we can take with us into the small challenges in life. I call them small in relation to these, but obviously they're not small to us when we're having a bad day and we're completely depressed, etc. This feeling, I matter, is such a powerful, powerful feeling. And we can live this way every single day with just a little bit of meditation on this idea. So allow me to turn the attention back to the video screen to Rabbi Label Wolf.
Life isn't random. There is a subtle cause and effect relationship that operates in your life. And that cause and effect relationship relates to a master plan that the master planner ingrained within your soul and within the world. Our task is to recognize the turnings in life and be able to choose freely those that correspond to the master plan. Gently close your eyes. Just become aware of the silence in the room. Become aware of the emptiness of the space, and that you, as a ball of small energy, occupies a place in that space. Become aware of your life. Go back to the beginning, early childhood. Observe the facets that seem to be recalled quickly about your childhood. Then your teenagehood. What incidents come quickly to mind? And adulthood. The transition within and between are catalysts that project you into the next phase of your life. The catalysts aren't arbitrary. Hashem places these catalysts into your life to keep nudging you towards a destiny, your personal destiny. Be aware that life is not random, but your capacity to reach your destiny quickly, clearly, painlessly, is part of your free choice, how you respond to the catalysts of life. Hashem imbues your life with purpose, but the way that you choose allows that purpose to be expressed optimally or less optimally. There's meaning to your life. The way you choose leaves footprints in the sands of time and in the world itself. Practice mindfully how to exercise choice so that your purpose overlaps with Hashem's destiny for you. And that way you achieve fulfillment, life's meaning, in a way that is painless, optimized, and in keeping with the intent of your reincarnation, why you, your soul, your innate plan, plays a significant role in the world. You are special. God has embedded specialness, individuality in your life. Live your purpose.
Essentially, today we successfully mastered 3 separate meditations. Number 1, hold on, let me share back this will be helpful to visualize it. Number 1, everything in this world is God, and therefore we are constantly in God's presence, right? That was step 1. Now, step 1 leads to step 2 and step 3, and you can look at them as a succession, or you can look at them each individually. And that can lead to joy, like the Baal Shem Tov students. Step 2, if we are constantly in God's presence and we appreciate that everything is intentional, that everything that God is doing in this world is intentional, that can have its own takeaway. That can be its own meditation and its own takeaway. That can help overcome a struggle. And number 3, which again, if we are constantly in God's presence and everything is intentional, then that leads to appreciating that everything has a purpose, everything matters. But that also helps us appreciate that we matter in every single moment of life. You can choose, if this is one of these 3 meditations you want to put down on paper, or if you want to treat them as one for a longer meditation. But I think that if we can internalize these ideas, not just leave them to be ideas that are up there, that we can access, but actually things that begin to become part of the way we live life, our lives will have a lot more meaning. Please turn your attention back to the video screens for a summary of this afternoon's lesson.
Lesson 3, Mastermind, the benefits of divine closeness. 1. God is the soul of the world, and his presence animates all of existence. 2. Every detail of creation is deliberately designed by God and is formed by a unique expression of his presence in that being. 3. God is with us always, and we can feel his presence. 4. Nothing is by chance. Everything that happens is directed by God and is supposed to happen. 5. Everything that happens is an integral part of the master plan of creation. 6. Each one of us and every circumstance of our lives is relevant and important to the overall purpose of existence.
Thank you for joining us for lesson 3 of meditation from Sinai. This has been lesson 3, Mastermind. Please join us next week for lesson 4, Mind Your Time, the Purpose and Power of the Present.